Thanks, Mr. Lockley, for coming in this afternoon. We might get you to please swear either an oath or an affirmation, and just tell us who you are and who you represent, please.
I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. My name is Tom Lockley. In a former life, for 40-odd years, I was a teacher. My present life is centred around museums and history, and I've volunteered in numerous museums over the past years, including the equivalent of two years full-time at Ultimo. In 2016, we established an email group, and although I'm speaking in my own name, the things that I say are well backed up by data and represent a considerable body of opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
That was your opening statement?
Well, I would really love to say something that's been on my mind for the last 2 hours, so let's make this my opening statement.
Okay. As long as you don't direct it at me, Mr. Lockley.
No, I'm directing it at Mr. Brown. When we heard about the...
Mr. Lockley, I warn you that adverse mention applies, and
I believe
if you do adversely mention anyone, I'll have to
I will not adversely mention Mr. Brown.
No, I'm quite happy to hear what he says. I'm just issuing a warning, that's all.
But I just want to say that when we heard about the Western Sydney Powerhouse Alliance late last year, our first reaction was, oh, not again, because over the years we've seen off several such mass opinions from the West. The Telegraph for months portrayed the furphy that we're all inner city snobs picking on the dear West, and we've done some analysis. 25% of the supporters of the Powerhouse Museum come from the West or the Blue Mountains. We heard, I think, from Mr. Grant, of 500,000 people who are clamouring for the museum out west. We looked at it, and what he meant was that they distributed 377,000 letterbox drops. Ms. Chadwick had a questionnaire. We looked at that, and we feel that it owed a lot to the Jim Hacker School of Administration. We've heard about the new Mars website, which is going to tell us all these wonderful things, and the number of posts to that over the years since May 2017 are less than what goes on to the Powerhouse Museum website every week. So here we've got another group that's purporting to prove that we are wrong when we say that the overwhelming majority of people support the Powerhouse. I'd like to ask Mr. Brown if he wouldn't mind sending us the contact details of all the people he's spoken to in Catholic Education Department, Committee for Sydney, Greater Western Sydney Giants, Parramatta Eels, Sydney Festival, Westmead Institute for Medical Research, Westmead Institute for Medical Research Foundation, University of Sydney, Western Sydney University, Western Sydney Wanderers. I would like to know who has talked to. I'd like copies of the resolutions passed by the boards of all these people, and then I can promise you that we will be visiting them, and we will showing them our fact sheets, which haven't been contradicted for the last 4 years. We're just fed up of dealing with what we believe are incorrect statements. I'd now like to move on to where I should have started. and our major problem, and I wonder if you could help with this, concerns the determination of the government that the traditional procedure of having a base case plus a group of, leading to a group of alternatives has been superseded by the decision that the base case for this project should be the determination of the government to move the Powerhouse Museum to Parramatta. This is something that really concerns us. Now, that's my opening statement. My main interest is to try and help you understand how important the culture of Parramatta and of Ultimo is, and how much it depends on the buildings that are under threat. Thank you for listening to me. Now I'd love to have your questions.
Thank you.
Okay.
Questions?
Okay, Mr. Lockley, now that we heard from the Minister that they put up some fencing this morning at 7:30, which now indicates they're beginning work on the Parramatta site, but we were told today that there was no opening date and no completion date. What's your response to that?
I have been told by Msavla that the project has not yet been determined, and because of that, the legal phrase is determined, because of that, nothing was definite. And I'm hoping that that's the case because we are terribly concerned about what might happen.
So, Mr. Lockley, now I understand that you oppose the closure and sale of Ultimo. The government has said that that will not occur, but there's a question mark of what they're going to do with the site, on the site, what they're going to protect. What is now the basis of the community campaign? What is your direction now?
The Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences, and particularly the Powerhouse campus, is the only museum in Australia devoted to the very important interface between applied arts and sciences, and that is terribly important to the development of Australia. If we're going to be the clever country, we need to take the things that we have and make new things with them. As such, it should be in the best place for its accessibility to Sydney, to the state, to the country and to the world. And I can tell you we get a surprising number of overseas visitors. Many people come into Sydney for a day on a cruise ship, and even though it's not promoted, they'll duck down to the Powerhouse Museum and spend a day there because they've heard of things like the Bolton and Watt Museum and so on, Bolton and Watt engine and so on. This is the spot for this museum, and it must be set up with full facilities. The history and culture of Parramatta has been very much underestimated by a lot of people, and Parramatta is the place for the Museum of New South Wales, the place that shows the enormous vitality of the museum of Parramatta. It's not a second best. We're not saying just have an immigration museum. Look at the richness of Parramatta culture. I've counted up 37 institutions, incidentally, that were not consulted when the museum proposal came up, that are really wonderful. The one that stands out is Elizabeth Farm, terribly relevant today because of Elizabeth MacArthur's work. And the staff there are absolutely superb. The female factory staff, they're devoted to what they're doing, and they deserve support, and they deserve to have a museum that reflects what Parramatta is, not something transplanted from its proper habitat and plonked in a place where Parramatta people don't want it.
Mr. Lockley, could I ask you about what your position is in response to the government's manoeuvres on the Harwood building?
If we're going to have a proper museum in Sydney, it needs to have backup facilities on site. We've got some wonderful exhibitions coming through, and I'm so impressed that we've got Australian curators producing Australian subjects, and there's a huge scope for Australia not to buy in turnkey exhibitions as we've done in the past, but to go out through the world and say, here is Australian stuff. You know, take it to all the museums of the world. And the Harwood building is essential to that. Oh, gee, Bill, we need some 3-inch screws. Oh, we'll have to go over to Castle Hill. back again. Not to have a proper facility at the Harwood building is ridiculous. Having said that, in all fairness, I must say that over the 12 years plus that I've been in the museum, there have been times when I've looked at the Harwood building and thought it was underutilised. There is room for other activities, but there must be a workshop and there must be a secretariat.
Well, what about also a storage of the collection? I mean, I've had a number of people contact my office and say, if the storage is going to be out of Castle Hill, well, then there's a very long and quite, difficult trip to get the collection either to Parramatta or to the Ultimo site. In fact, the Castle Hill collection site.
Castle Hill, as you all know, was set up, was originally purchased by the museum as a eucalyptus plot so that the museum could develop studies in the growth of eucalyptus trees for the production of eucalyptus oil, which was a big export for Australia and is still a unique product. I understand, and this is not one of my guaranteed facts, okay? I understand that the proposed new building is going to take virtually the last stand of that eucalyptus, which has got historic interest. I don't think that the new store is necessary if the Harwood building is retained as it is. But, Mr. Shoebridge, I think that the idea of having a store there that you move stuff into a store at Harwood and then put on display is the way to go.
And from a museum management point of view, having your collection as close as possible to your exhibition space seems to me to be both efficient and also good practice in terms of ensuring that the collection doesn't get damaged in transport.
Well, I'm not a museum manager, but it makes sense, and I'd like to see somebody persuade me otherwise.
Very compelling.
I have a couple of questions, if that's what this pause is waiting to be filled with. Excellent.
Chris Brown again?
I didn't attack Chris Brown. I just want to, all he has to do is say, okay, these are the people we've talked to. Then we'll talk to them and we'll say, hey, have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? Because we usually find then when people say, oh, you're not talking any sense at all, it's obvious that we've got to move the museum to Parramatta. If we sit down and we say, look, this was never researched. There was no consultation. And on top of that, it's a bad idea. If you wanted to choose an institution to move to Parramatta, the most costly and inefficient one would be to move the Powerhouse. You've got... In the Ultimo Powerhouse, you've got strengthened floors to carry heavy things. You've got strengthened ceilings to hang things from. You've got a steam reticulation system that's already installed. You have big objects, and according to Peter Root, the best logistician in Australia for museums, according to many people, according to the museum's own contracted person, objects when we were going to move the whole museum, the big objects had to be the last out of Ultimo, the first into Parramatta, with consequent enormous delays in the building. Getting back to your original question, I've lost it. So can you repeat it?
Well, I think I'm going to hand you over to Ben.
Ben.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I know I haven't answered your question, but I think I've spoken relatively. Mr. Franklin, I'm so sorry. Could you repeat your question?
No, I don't think I actually got to the question, so that's...
I'm sorry.
It was just the side of him that required the answer. We've all felt that.
My deepest apologies.
No, not at all, not at all. But I guess I do want to pick up what the contention that you just made, which is the previous witness spoke on behalf of people of Western Sydney and of Parramatta, saying that he felt that they wanted it. You've made it quite clear in your evidence, Mr. Lockley, that I think you might have said Parramatta people don't want it. I guess, so my question is, just to flip it, how can you say that, and what evidence do you have? And I'm not being aggressive in this.
No, not at all, and I'm delighted to answer. The organisation, I'm sorry, this is going to be long and boring because I'm a detailed person. The organisations that have supported the move began with the Western Sydney Arts and Cultural Lobby. Mrs McGregor said that she had conducted examination into all alternatives, and this was the one that stand out. It was a perfect fit. Well, I've put up some opposing arguments to that. The Western Sydney Arts and Cultural Lobby were the main people with whom Ms McGregor spoke. They disappeared about 18 months after she spoke with them. They've never had a website. We've tried to contact them ever since. There have been other organisations that purport to speak on Western Sydney, and they simply don't last. Now, the people, that support the Powerhouse, the people who do last are North Parramatta Regional Residents Action Group. They're incorporated body, they have a website, they have a history going back for many years. There's another group, the Western Sydney, I'm sorry, I've lost their name, but there is another cultural group that have also persisted from 2014 right through to now, and they have a website and they function. Western Sydney Arts and Cultural Lobby started, stopped, and incidentally, they didn't recommend the establishment of the museum. They approved it. They did not recommend it. They did recommend the installation in Western Sydney of a film and television school and a film museum, rather like the one they have in Federation Square in Melbourne. Now, my point is the opposition to the museum in Parramatta has been consistent, it has been principled, it has been based on fact. The supporters of the museum rely on polemic. The inner city people are trying to rob the Western Sydney and all this sort of thing.
So I guess what I'm looking for is I appreciate that your comments about the North Parramatta group and the other unnamed group.
Okay.
I get that. My question is though about the broad populace.
Okay.
How can we be assured that when you say the Parramatta people don't want it,
Fair enough.
How can you back that up?
We can't. But why don't we say to the Parramatta people, by the way, before I begin with that, there was a seminar of all arts group held by North Parramatta Regional Residents Action Group where this was discussed, and the recommendation was not for the Powerhouse Museum but for the development of Fleet Street, which many of us believe has the potential to be one of the great cultural areas of the world. Now, getting back to your question, and I've done it again. Yes. Why can't we say to the Parramatta people, here are the options. You can have the museum where it is, on its site. Bear in mind that the elected Parramatta Council before dissolution passed many resolutions saying that they wanted that site kept as open area. When the Parramatta Council was run by the administrator, just before she finished her term, the deal was signed to have the museum on the Parramatta River side. When the elected Parramatta Council came back, there was considerable discussion about it. Now, talk to the next witness, Donna, about this, but here is my perception. Again, this is one of the things I don't guarantee, okay? When the new council was elected, there were three groups of people. There were the people who said, we don't want that museum on the site, we want our open space and we want the museum somewhere else. There was the people who said, oh, this is a wonderful project, we support it. And there's a group in the middle. Now, my perception is that when it came to a vote, the people in the middle said, it looks like we either get the museum on the site that is at Parramatta, or we get nothing. So they voted for it. If I remember rightly, it only just passed. It passed on the casting vote of the mayor. It wasn't a lay-down misere for either side. But I still say that the councillors who voted for the present project were often swayed by the fact that if they felt that if they didn't vote for it, they would get nothing. That's, I do not guarantee that as fact. Okay?
We understand that that's just your opinion.
Yes, it's just a guess.
Yeah, no problem. Just my final question, Mr. Lockley, is in your opening statement you talked about the importance of having a world-class applied arts and sciences museum in Australia, and in a part of Australia which is the easiest, the best place, I think you said, for accessibility and so on. And
in a wonderful heritage building.
Understood. And therefore contended that the Sydney CBD basically was the best place to do it. I agree with you that that sort of access is critical, which is why I'm so thrilled that the Ultimo site is being kept and maintained. I guess my question is, why not have more than one site, like the Smithsonian does? And therefore, I guess, can we not... what would you say to the contention that the Powerhouse or the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences could have a number of different sites, which is obviously the plan? And why is that not ideal, as far as you're concerned, as it is in other parts of the world?
I say here that I'm going to say something that is not supported by an overwhelming majority of people who email me and things like that. I think that the Ultimo Museum should concentrate on the history of the area and the interface between arts and sciences, and the things like fashion and maybe IT might be better, it might be fairer if they were placed at Parramatta. I stress that this is my own opinion. Now, one thing that I do think should be retained at Ultimo is one of the best education programs I've seen in my professional career. And that is the exhibition of HSC works, which is held every year. It's absolutely wonderful. They bring in the best HSC techniques. I'm sorry, I retired 20 years ago. Science, needlework. I've forgotten the proper terms for them. And they bring in the best exhibits, and they have the display of the exhibits with the students' diary of how they were produced. They have young designers and young industrialists who come in, and the schools come in and they talk to the young designers and young industrialists and so on. Then they have a session where the heavies from the curriculum branch talk to them about, how the project will be marked. And I have been in awe of the atmosphere that is engendered in that. I would like to see it retained in Sydney because it's better for... I would like to see it retained in Ultimo because it's better for the whole state, but that's my excuse. I don't want to lose it from Ultimo. I'm not travelling to Parramatta.
Mr. Lockley, can I just... I have to duck off this minute, but can I thank you for your long-term commitment as a volunteer and bring your expertise to the Powerhouse Museum. I know that not everyone around this committee table will always agree with your position, but also the passion and the consistency with which I've seen you advocate for the Powerhouse. I think it's a public service, and I wanted to acknowledge that.
I need to say something very clearly. I've been there for 12 years, equivalent to full-time years. I'm the newcomer. I'm learning. We have some awesome people, particularly at Castle Hill at the moment, but I'm going to embarrass Meg. She's well in her 90s. I'm going to embarrass her because we've all been at it for years to slow down a bit so that we can catch up. I needed some information for, just in case you asked some curly questions the other night, and I rang her up and I got the answers far quicker than I'd get from the website. There are some awesome people there. when I first, about 6 years ago, we had an amazing group on Thursday. There was a ex-regional director of education. There's an 80-year-old engineer. He'd emigrated from England, and he'd first come to Australia. He'd emigrated from England at the age of 80 and volunteered at the Powerhouse Museum. He first came to Australia in the 1970s to build the basic oxygen furnaces. Look, thanks for what you said. I want to emphasise that I'm a newcomer. I'm still learning. The scope of knowledge out there is huge.
Thanks, Mr. Lockley.
All right, on that basis, we'll call it a day. Thank you very much, Mr. Lockley, for coming in and giving us your knowledge and answering our questions. And I too echo what Mr. Shoebridge has said. Thanks indeed for your contribution.
And I might say that was extraordinarily easy. I was all prepared for some difficult questions.
Well,
But look, may I have another 40 seconds?
Yes.
Please. This is purely me. The Powerhouse Museum and the dwelling at Parramatta are part of our very being. It's sort of like Mabo for the First Nations people, but not as pronounced. These the government of the day has the unmitigated privilege and honour of looking after them. They have the responsibility to take care of them and to develop them using the best available expertise. They are not things to be arbitrarily decided and sold off at the whim of somebody personal, some personal idea, some personal opinion. Look, I'd like to finish by quoting somebody 60 years plus younger than me on a far more important matter. How dare they? Thank you very much.
Thank you.